The year is 1869. Ambrose Harper had just gotten married to his bride, Constance. Ambrose was the son of wealthy farmers from California, and his new wife, Constance, it seemed, was madly in love with him. A photo was taken at the ceremony to commemorate the occasion. However, shortly thereafter, Ambrose would go missing, leaving Constance a widow. 3 years would pass and Constance would find love, allegedly, with a man, a banker from the East Coast named Frank Banks. They would be married in 1872, but tragically, shortly thereafter, just like Ambrose before him, Frank would also disappear mysteriously. 2 years later, in 1874, Constance would marry for the third time to the Marquis de Doom, a European man with a military background, but as with the 3 husbands before them, he would also mysteriously disappear without a trace. And it was at this point that Constance's family members and neighbors began to grow slightly suspicious. Maybe she was the one responsible for all of her previous husbands' disappearances, doing away with them in the middle of the night, with no witnesses able to report their findings. But without any solid leads, Constance remained a free woman and was free to marry her 4th husband, Reginald Kane, a railroad baron, gambler, and world-renowned gourmand. They would marry the following year in 1875, and just like the husbands before him, he would also mysteriously disappear. Constance didn't seem to grow any richer, though. Instead, she seemed to grow sadder and sadder. Not the attitude one would expect from a bride meticulously murdering and hiding the corpses of all of her previous husbands. It was her final husband, George Hightower, who was extremely rich, a member of the prestigious Hightower family, known for their luxurious hotel in the American waterfront in New York City. However, in due time, it seemed that dear beloved George would also succumb to the curse that had afflicted his brother and all of the preceding husbands of his wife, Constance, and he would disappear as well. Constance would eventually settle down in an old mansion in New Orleans. She would grow old and eventually die in that very same house. However, this mansion was not any ordinary mansion. The manor contained within it the souls of 999 other happy haunts. But Constance, after finding love so many times and losing that same love time and time again, didn't necessarily consider herself to be so much of a happy haunt, more of a forlorn spirit. And so she would take up residence in the attic of the old mansion, becoming yet another spectral inhabitant of the house that she once lived in, now cursed to be surrounded by memorabilia of all of her marriages from the past, haunted by not only the ghosts around her, but by the endless beating of her own broken heart, the eerie sound of a bridal march being played on a piano nearby, and reminders of what her life could have been. That story might sound familiar to those of you who have frequented this channel before, or who just know a bit of the lore of the Haunted Mansion. Constance Hatchaway was the previous inhabitant of the attic scene at Disneyland's Haunted Mansion. However, you'll notice that I didn't really mention her with her hatchet, or her last name, or her killing her husbands in that little origin story that I just went over. Maybe she did, maybe she didn't. Disneyland recently got a brand new bride in their attic scene, one that is completely separate from Constance Hatchaway, the bride that exists now at Walt Disney World and previously at Disneyland. But what is her story? Who is this new bride? Why is she forlorn? Did she kill her husbands, or did they just disappear tragically? All of those questions I aim to answer in today's video, because we did get more lore in the new Haunted Mansion, and I don't know what I would be doing if I didn't cover it. This is Offhand Disney. I talk about the Haunted Mansion a lot here, in case you haven't noticed. Now, I'm going to be making a lot of leaps and guesses in this video. It is a theory video after all, so do forgive me if some of the plot threads don't necessarily connect 100%, but I will be going off of what little we get in terms of a storyline for the new bride, and yeah, it is very little. But let's start from the very beginning, shall we? We know that this new bride's name is still Constance. Maybe not necessarily Constance Hatchaway, however, her name is still Constance as evidenced on the portraits that can still be found in the attic scene. That is true. And all of her husbands remain the same. Marquis de Doom, George Hightower, all of those husbands are the same people. However, they don't necessarily disappear in the same way. Now, in order to make what I'm about to say a little bit more clear and easily understandable, I encourage you to watch my Haunted Mansion Multiverse Halloween special, either now or after you finish this video. I'll put a card right up there in the corner so you can watch it. That video will explain to you the basics on how the Haunted Mansion multiverse works and how the Disneyland Mansion and the Walt Disney World Mansion do take place in separate universes. And now, with this new Constance added to the Disneyland Haunted Mansion attic scene, the multiverse has grown even bigger. There is now another Disneyland Mansion universe, this time with a different Constance. Think of it in terms of, I guess, the most popular multiverse in media right now, the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Constance Hatchaway is basically Spider-Man, in that they are both Constance variants. They are, however, distinct and different, like Tom Holland and Tobey Maguire. They both have the name Constance, they're both ghost brides, and they do both reside within the Haunted Mansion, but they are, at their core, different people. But the question of the hour is this, my friends: is this new Constance just as murderous as the old Constance? Or is she more of an innocent figure, a sad figure? And for that, we need to go back to a Kim Irvine interview. Before the Haunted Mansion reopened after the year without a mansion, Kim Irvine, the creative lead behind all of these changes, said this to the Los Angeles Times.
When we look back on the original stories of the attic, it was much more about a beating heart bride who was sadly standing in the corner of this attic, kind of tossed away with the rest of the lost things that were up there. And I really loved that story tale, and we thought we would kind of move back towards that. And she still has all the husbands that she's lost through the years, but they've just disappeared and she doesn't know what happened to them. It has definitely a different mood to it, but I think the original Imagineers story for the attic and the mood that it had was such a neat contrast from the bouncy, happy ballroom scene where they're waltzing and, you know, the organ music is a happy tune, going into the attic, much more solemn kind of mood. So it's a neat juxtaposition to it.
And she's right, by the way. Kim Irvine and her team did a wonderful job of hearkening back to the mansion's past, to 1969 and the following years. The new bride is wonderful. And the vibe in the attic now is decidedly less sinister, and I think that goes along with the character. The new Constance is absolutely less of a sinister character than Hatchaway before her. But now, speaking from a lore perspective, what happened to each of her past 5 husbands, and why now is she inhabiting the attic of the mansion? And I decided lore-wise it would be nice to start from the end, not to make everything more confusing or even more confusing than it is now, but we know the most about one of her specific husbands, George Hightower, the 5th one, the last one. Because George, of course, as many of you might be aware if you've watched my channel before, ties into the massive overarching story that Disney has been incorporating into their parks all over the world for the past decade and a half or so, the Society of Explorers and Adventurers. You can find them most clearly in Adventureland, but they exist all over, in New Orleans Square, Mystic Point, at Typhoon Lagoon Water Park over in Orlando. Some of the resort hotels even have references. Trader Sam's. The Indiana Jones video game for the Xbox has technically SCA connections because there's a map of the Jungle Cruise right there. You can see it. Very quickly, George Hightower, Constance's 5th husband, is the brother of Harrison Hightower, the owner of the Hightower Hotel in New York City, or the American waterfront, the land at Tokyo Disney Sea, and also a disgraced member of the Society of Explorers and Adventurers, a group of people who travel the world and document different cultures and artifacts. Albert Falls, the namesake for Schweitzer Falls on the Jungle Cruise, was a member of the SEA. His daughter is currently the leader of the the JNC and in the SEA as well. JNC is the Jungle Navigation Company. It just occurred to me I'm throwing a bunch of acronyms at you right now. And the daughter in the Adventureland Treehouse is an aspiring member of SEA. You can see different application letters and books and references to the society dotted all over her room in the treehouse. So we do have a lot of story to work with when it comes to George Hightower specifically. The other ones, not so much, but we'll get to them in a second. But there is pre-established lore for him, and that's what's important. For more information on George, we're going to turn to The Haunted Mansion, Imagineering, a Disney classic by Jason Sorrell. One of, if not the best sources for Haunted Mansion history, details, Easter eggs, and lore. In this book, we learn about Constance's 5 husbands, and under George's profile, it says, Constance's 5th and final marriage was to George, one of the owners of the manor that would later become known as the Haunted Mansion. With his bushy mustache and deep-set eyes, he is unmistakable as the man who, in later years, would be depicted in one of the stretching portraits, his grim visage etched upon a tombstone. The wedding gifts on display are the most ornate of all, including crystal bowls, vases, and imported china. A number of souvenirs from George's exotic foreign trips can also be seen in this vignette. The wedding portrait appears to be in a large decorative frame and includes the inscription, George and Constance, 1877. So we can gather from this little tidbit in this book that George Hightower also was somewhat of a globe-trotting adventurer and collector like his brother Harrison. This, however, is all going off of the assumption that George's backstory has remained the same and that Constance's is the only one that has sort of changed a little bit. We also have our confirmation that George is the dear beloved George. On the tombstone in the stretching room, they have the same mustache, which must mean that Constance Hatchaway is the old lady sitting atop the tombstone with the rose that you can clearly see in the portrait in the attic here. Same rose, even holding it the very same way. However, Constance in this picture has a sort of sly grin, a sort of knowing look, and George has the axe in his head, which seems to imply that even in this new continuity, Constance is the one behind George's disappearance. She did kill him, and by the looks of it, with an axe still. So even though Disney has gone on record stating that they don't want this new bride to be seen as sort of a killer, if we use the context clues gathered from around the mansion, she has at least one death on her hands, one murder that she has committed. The stretching room portrait remains the same, and maybe one day when they change out the hanging man, as they have alluded that they are going to consider, maybe at the same time they'll remove the axe from George's head in the stretching room portrait. That's not me hoping they do it, by the way. That's just me saying maybe they'll do it. You never know. That's just me spitballing, though, just a sort of idea if they want to make the bride less of an overt killer. However, this Constance, she is one. She's killed people. Okay, so George is a very outstanding case. We now know that the new Constance did kill George Hightower, her 5th husband, but like I said, let's work backwards. What about Reginald, her 4th husband? Well, in the book, it says, Constance's penultimate husband, as she continued her ascent of the social ladder, was Reginald, a celebrated railroad baron, gambler, and world-renowned gourmand, as I mentioned earlier. In a manner befitting his lofty passion in life, Reginald sports his brocade vest, lacy shirt, formal jacket, and classic top hat of a distinguished gentleman. An enormous ring conspicuously adorns his little finger. The Black Widow bride's diabolical plot is unfolding exactly as planned. Now, this is where we diverge a little bit from the 2006 Constance Hatchaway story. Here's where things get a little bit different, because now it is definitely unclear as to whether or not Constance killed Reginald. He doesn't have very many other references in the mansion. Now, old Reggie was a railroad baron and gambler, so maybe Constance didn't kill this one. Maybe Reggie just disappeared because he had wronged some people, or maybe he owed the wrong people a lot of money. That would be a decent way to tie together the sad and longing bride that Kim Irvine was talking about in her interview with the disappearance of at least one of her 5 husbands. Maybe she did actually love Reginald. Maybe Reginald tragically was killed by someone else. However, we can infer that this is where Constance inherited a majority of her fortune from, because railroad barons in the 1800s, let me tell you, those guys were loaded. Maybe Reggie knew Barnabas T. Bullion. Maybe his downfall was tied to the downfall of the Big Thunder Mining Company. I don't know, something to keep in mind. Constance's third husband, the Marquis de Doom, was a decorated military veteran. Maybe he got called back to active duty and died in battle. That's a plausible explanation. However, the more excuses I'm making for all of these husbands' disappearances, the more and more likely it seems to me that Constance is just still responsible for all of their deaths. Okay, moving on backward to number 2. Now, Frank was a pillar of his community, a very well-liked person amongst his friends, acquaintances, and even some strangers who lived in his town. His job also wasn't necessarily dangerous. He didn't run with any tough crowds. He didn't go to war. He was a banker. Now, I'm not saying bankers are immortal and can't die, but I am saying that if he did die and Constance wasn't responsible for it, perhaps it was some sort of terrible accident. Ambrose, her first husband, was also a naive man, as it says here in the book, but also the son of a successful farmer, maybe a farmer himself. Not the richest guy, but you know, he's fine, good guy, solid guy. Look at that bow tie. I love a good bow tie. Honestly, it's really only the Marquis de Doom and Reginald's death that strike me as somewhat explainable. The other 3 are very mysterious, and if you look at the common thread between all of these 5 men, it's Constance. The conclusion that I'm drawing from all of these context clues that we've learned about researching these past 5 husbands and some of the props within the scene is that, unfortunately for Disney, I still think that every hint that we've gotten so far still points to the new Constance being a murderer, and in one case specifically, still an axe murderer. If they really wanted to hone in on that sad, forlorn bride whose husbands went missing, I think they really need to consider switching out the portraits. They do something similar to this in Phantom Manor over at Disneyland Paris, where Melanie Ravenswood's husbands slowly disappear through different accidents. It shows how they died, and we can see why she's so sad, why she's so forlorn. It's because her husbands, they weren't killed by her, but they were killed or they were lost in mysterious ways. Disney needs to really consider changing up the attic scene just a little bit more, unfortunately, even though they changed it up a ton. They need to change it just a little more. Going back to George for another second, though, because like I said, we know so much about this man. The book states that he is one of the owners of the house or the mansion that would eventually become the Haunted Mansion. And so a previous theory that I had about Constance being the owner of the house after George's death, I made a video on this years ago. I'm going to put a card over there, right there in the corner, so you can watch that one. Still, again, if the backstory remains the same for George, is the case with this new Constance. This is the owner of the house right here. She's sad though. But what more is there to glean about this new bride? What more to her story is there? And there is something in the new mansion attic that not a lot of people are talking about that I do want to mention for a moment, and that's the cat. Her cat, right next to her, the one-eyed cat. Now, the one-eyed cat, for those of you unaware, is a reference to a very old piece of Haunted Mansion concept art drawn up by Ex Atencio. That's right, the guy who helped write Grim Grinning Ghosts and A Pirate's Life for Me, he drew this, and this is terrifying, and I love it. And up until recently, there were 0 one-eyed cats in the mansion, and then there was 1, and now there's 2. Now, is this the same cat that we see in the pet cemetery out front? Is this the same cat that we see while waiting to board our doom buggies? Is this even a ghost cat? This might just be a regular cat. We also see cats in the graveyard scene, so it's not a super big stretch to say that this is just a wandering feline who ventured into the mansion and is now sitting in the attic scene where it's cozy, warm, a bit creepy, but, you know, comfy. However, I am starting to lean toward ghost cat or some sort of paranormal cat because, like I said, in the graveyard we have these cats. These cats do not look like this cat. This cat is definitely unique in that it is kind of spooky. It's giving me the evil eye. Maybe this kitty is Constance's pet. Maybe she keeps it around to cheer her up because she is a more forlorn Constance now. That might make sense. There's still a lot we don't know about new Constance, and I do think that over time Disney will release little bits of lore here and there. Whether or not they'll be canon to the ride is anyone's guess, but the bride is just too dang merchandisable to let go. I mean, for crying out loud, we already have a different photo of her here, as can be seen in the exit elevator from the Haunted Mansion and also in the brand new gift shop somewhere beyond. This offers us a closer look at her face, and the more I'm looking at this lady, the more I'm thinking she is not entirely innocent when it comes to the deaths of some of her husbands. So if the goal for this update to the mansion was to de-violencify the bride, they actually did do a good job of this. She's definitely less of a killer now. All of this is just theorizing though. We really don't know for sure and we can't say, but that's by design. The Disney Imagineers wanted to leave it up to all of our interpretations, just like the mansion storyline when it opened in 1969. My running theory is this now, my friends. This new Constance inherited the mansion after killing George Hightower. George Hightower is still a murder victim. Constance did kill him. However, the other 4 husbands may have died in tragic ways, either getting mixed up with the wrong people or through tragic accidents. And maybe Constance eventually came to regret her killing of George Hightower, making her even more forlorn, even sadder, and after inheriting the mansion, she would pass away and go on to haunt the attic, where she is still to this day sadly looking back on her life, her regrets, and her loves that have since moved on, not in the mansion. They are not in the mansion if you see them anywhere. They could be in the portraits. I'm gonna say for this theory that the portraits are just sort of like memories visualized through the bride. So they're not haunting the portraits in this case, not like the changing portraits in the hallway. So while the new Constance is a sadder character, she still does have a dark past behind her. Whether that's her own fault or someone else's fault, that's up to you, my friends, to discuss amongst yourselves, because this is all just theory crafting. However, I do think that the new bride story is very much a mix of the original 1969 Attic Bride and the 2006 Constance Hatchaway Bride. It's a melding of those two storylines, and I think that's actually really cool. Good for Disney. And it's neat because with every new addition to the mansion, we get new or changing lore, and that's more stuff for me to theorize on and talk about endlessly, because I don't think there's a Disney ride out there, not even rides like Pirates of the Caribbean, with as much environmental storytelling as the Haunted Mansion. There are so many nooks and crannies that you can look to and make stories of your own. And the way that this has become embraced by Disney in the past, where some fan theories have become canon, like the names of the hitchhiking ghosts, Phineas, Ezra, and Gus. We, the guests and the cast members, are very much involved with the storytelling and story crafting of the mansion, and that makes it unique, more so than any other attraction at any other theme park in the world. And as for Constance Hatchaway, well, where did she go? The answer, my friends, is right here. I have her right here in this Host-A-Ghost jar. So if Disney ever wants to put her back in the Disneyland mansion, or if they need somewhere to place her, you go and just call me up. I got her right here in this jar. She sits on my shelf, and sometimes she speaks to me. Imagine that being your eternal afterlife. You're just stuck in a, albeit pretty well-made jar. I'd be kind of mad. Let's see what Constance has to say about it. Constance, any thoughts?
Summon a spirit from the mansion. Ghoulies travel from near and far, all invited to reside in a jar.
I don't think that's Constance, I think that's Madame Leota. However, Constance is in here, okay? This is proof. What will be the next lore drop for the Haunted Mansion? Well, only time will tell, my friends. But until then, I'll be here, a stalwart guardian of the story of the Haunted Mansion. You can rely on me. I'm not even a little bit tired. I got through the whole George Hightower thing. I come to think of it, I'm actually kind of sleepy. So can you go ahead and watch over the Haunted Mansion lore for like an hour? I'll be right back. Oh, okay, sorry. I'm back a little bit early. Hello, everybody. Thank you for watching this video. That's a bit of a deeper dive into the lore of the Haunted Mansion, the new bride, and everything that we have recently got. Now you know my theory behind the new Constance's backstory. I'd love to hear yours down in the comments below. Of course, this being the first/last video of the month, you can see the names of my Patreon supporters gliding over there on the left-hand side of your screen. If you want to join their ranks, you can. For even just $1 a month, you can use the link in the description down below. That will get you access to the white tier, but you can go higher if you want to pledge, I should say, more money. You get higher tiers and sometimes more, what's the word I'm looking for? Perks? Yeah, more perks. There we go. If you enjoyed this video, please be sure to hit the like button, and if you're new around here and you want more Disney theory crafting / lore videos, please be sure to hit that subscribe button. However, all that talk about Patreon and Patreon supporters, if you'd rather just follow me for free on other social media sites, I am on Blue Sky, Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter. I am at Offhand Disney on all of those different websites. I don't believe there's very much more to talk about than that, though, my friends. I do have a few more little pieces of lore and theory crafting that I will work into a video in the future. It's not enough for its own, separate full-length theory video like this one. It has to do with the mausoleum that you use to exit out of the mansion through the elevator, through the ADA elevator. But I will work that into a video in the future if we do get some other stuff in the mansion coming up here. I would hope relatively soon. I guess maybe not soon, but after the next Haunted Mansion holiday transformation. And now I'm just yapping just to fill time so you can see all of my lovely Patreon supporters' names. Everybody, thank you all so much for watching. I look forward to seeing all of you in the next video. Probably not Haunted Mansion related, but it will be Disneyland. I believe I'm going to do something Tom Sawyer Island related. Keep that in the back of your head. I'll see you next week here at Offhand Disney. Everyone, thank you for watching, and I'll see you all a little later.